Hi, my name is Todd Millar from Pull Espresso Machines, and today I'm going to show you some important gasket removal and replacement on Pull Espresso Machines. This will actually apply for many other machines, many other brands. They work very similar. Over the years, they haven't made a huge amount of changes, just a few improvements. But I'm going to show you how to replace all the gaskets, how to lubricate it properly, and actually how to maintain your machine. So let's start. I'll get you familiar with the basic components inside of a lever espresso machine. We've got the upper portion of the lever, we've got the bottom portion of the lever, and an inner cylinder. The inner cylinder is on the inside of the bottom portion, and it's actually on the inside. This is in two pieces. And the upper portion, which you see here, is the upper portion of the machine. It's got the spring, the actual V gaskets, the Teflon guide gasket, and it pretty much holds the cam, which is what you're actually pulling on when you pull the lever down. First thing is first, I want to make sure that it's very important for everybody to understand that you want to make sure to turn off the machine. I usually turn it off a couple hours before I'm going to work on it, and the reason why I do that is I want this giant head, this giant piece of brass, that's chrome plated brass, I want it to cool off. But more importantly, I want to get all the steam pressure out of the machine. So I turn the machine off. A couple hours later, I come back. Maybe I do in the evening after the shop is closed. And if it's your home machine, just do in the evening when you're not using it. So basically let it cool down, let all the pressure relieve out of the actual boiler. The other thing is that I unplug it just for good measure, and I turn the water off to the machine. It's just smart, and it's just a good practice anytime you're working on an espresso machine. So let's do that first. Turn off the machine, let it power down, let it really cool off. I'm going to first remove my group head handle, and it's fairly easy to do. Remove that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the group head gasket. So we've got actual 1, 2, 3 V gaskets, 2 O-rings, and a group head gasket, and then a guide ring, which we can or may not replace. So our group head gasket, just for an example, these are standard black EPDM, or it could be nitrile rubber, and even potentially Viton, depending on the color of the actual gasket. The Vitons tend to be green, not always, but sometimes they're green. And this is an EPDM or Viton, depending on who made the actual gasket. First thing I'm gonna do is replace that, or remove that, sorry. So what I do, and I'll show you this on this one as an example. This one is the bottom portion, which we're seeing like that. What I want to do is I want to actually pry it off. And so all I'm doing is prying against the screen. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could stab the gasket and pop it out. That's the way a traditional a mechanical or electrical machine would work, is you'd have a screw in the center, you'd remove the screw or the bolt, and then you'd stab the gasket and pry it out. And it can be a lot of fun, to say the least. On these machines, they tend to be pretty easy. Because the screen and the gasket, the screen is actually being held up by the gasket by use of friction. So I'm going to go ahead and pry against this screen itself. And I kind of work around in a circular. And what I'm using here for a screwdriver is it's a very, very skinny flathead screwdriver. Typically in the industry, if you're a service tech out in the road, you're going to have a scratch awl. And a scratch awl looks like a screwdriver, but it's just a pointy screwdriver. It's really not used for anything except stabbing and prying. On a machine that hasn't been serviced for a long time, this gasket can get very, very hard. It's almost like cement, and some people actually have called me and said, "Todd, I swear there's no gasket in there. The gasket's so hard, I'm chiseling into metal." And it's like, I know, it's just been there a long time. But no, you do indeed have a gasket. So something that takes a little more effort than it would normally require. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the 4 screws. Now, this is an important thing I want to talk about, because this is where you can get into trouble. There's actually 4 screws on this that separate the upper portion from the lower portion of this group head. Super important to use the right wrench. I'm using an Allen head wrench, and this Allen screw wrench, this is a very special one. This is a 4mm. Sometimes these will be bolts or even screws, like a Phillips screw. I've even seen flathead screws in the older ones. And on this one, I want to make sure that I'm using the right wrench. Don't use like an SAE or an American wrench like a fractional wrench, like if it says 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch or whatever, that's the wrong set of wrenches. You want to use the metric one. I've not seen any machine that's built in Europe that ever uses American style screws. So the reason why I say that is if you strip this screw out, if I put this in here and I strip it out or break the screw off, it can get you in trouble. So I want to make sure to use the right wrench. I can't stress it enough. And on these wrenches, I'm using a really neat one. It's got an actual speed ball on it. So the end is got kind of a ball shape. And what that's meant for is removing the screw after it's already loosened. I don't use the speed ball for high torque. You'll strip out your screw. So you use this end for the high torque, the smaller, shorter end. Use this once it's loosened, then I can actually be at a different angle. I don't have to be straight up and down like a normal Allen wrench is. So I want to use a lot of upward force on this. These are critical screws. I use a lot of upward force with my hand to really make sure it's seated up, and I kind of wiggle it back and forth. Then I'm going to go ahead and loosen. Okay, then I'm going to use my speed ball. Now for the video, I've removed all of the screws except this last one, just for speeding up the process here. So remove the screw. Typically I have one here, one here, one here, and one here. And this head, which I haven't messed with, does have all 4. So I just removed just the last one. Set my Allen wrench down, grab the piston, pull it straight up. Now for this video, I wanted to show you, I'm using these silicone ones. We just started using these silicone ones. This is fairly new in the market. These are great gaskets. I'm kind of on the fence on. I think they're decent, but you know the classic black ones? These are great gaskets too, so don't be afraid of these. We're replacing these about every 6 months, typically. At 8 months, I've seen people go as long as 9 or 12, but what happens is you start getting leakage between these gaskets. So I'm going to set this off to the side because I want to get into the actual bottom portion, the cylinder, the inner cylinder. So let's set this off to the side. Okay, now I'm going to show you something. And let's remove, just like we did on this one, let's go ahead and remove the screen and the group of gasket. You'll notice I'm using a blue. The ones that are coming off are blue. This is silicone as well, so we're playing with these. These are fun. You'll see inside of here, there's actually a cylinder inside here. This isn't just one large piece of metal. There's actually an inner cylinder. So in order to get that out, I've got to use a kind of a weird method, but I figured this out over the years. I made a little block of wood. I'm using, in my case, a 3-inch block of walnut. Got lots of that scrap. And you'll see here, inside this, there's a little groove on this side and that side. And what that's for, it's for the handle to fit into. So I'm taking advantage of that, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fit my little block of wood in there, okay? It'll be on the machine. You don't, just by the way, you don't have to remove the heads to work on these heads. You leave them on the machine. I'm gonna find my little groove, which is like that. I'm gonna go ahead and tap it. And what I just did is basically push the inner cylinder up and I pull it out. That's my inner cylinder. So that's actually brass with a high chromium on the inside. So it's a hardened chromium. And the hard chromium on the inside reduces wear. Obviously it's gonna last longer than the softer brass. But I've got 2 O-rings. This is important. There's one O-ring that's on the actual cylinder on the outside. And if you get your gasket replacement kits, you'll look at them and you'll think these are the same O-rings, but they're actually indeed not. I have a larger one and a smaller one. The larger one goes on the outside of that. So I'm going to take my screwdriver or my hand and I'm just going to work it over to put the new one on. And obviously you'll probably have the same situation. The O-rings get pretty hard and brittle, so when you pop it off, and I usually use my little screwdriver. Don't stab yourself. I've done that many times. Pull it off and just I do this kind of circular thing. Whenever I'm replacing O-ring gaskets and on machines or even V gaskets, I use this method, and it's really nice. It makes it really easy. So the other one, the smaller O-ring, is hiding, and where it's hiding on the inside of this head. So let me pop this one out. This one should be pretty easy to take out. Okay, so this one is on the inside bottom. It's hard to see, but on the inside bottom, there's an O-ring here. And so it's actually attached to the inside, kind of the outer wall. How I get that out is I take my screwdriver, same one, or my scratch awl, and I go ahead and find it, pop it out, take my replacement, which is my smaller O-ring, put it up inside there. It just fits in that groove, and I just push it in there. It fits real nicely. Now I'm ready to put the cylinder back inside the machine. This is a lubrication that I use. It's called Super Lube. I'm not being sponsored by Super Lube. Many of us in the service industry have been using Super Lube for a long, long time. The reason why we like it is, and they make a couple different versions. They make a spray, which is different. This is an actual grease. It's an odorless, tasteless synthetic grease. So if you use the wrong grease, you'll actually destroy the gasket. So you want to make sure you use a food grade grease that is synthetic or silicone grease. And if I'm using silicone gaskets, I don't like using silicone grease. I like using Super Lube when I'm using silicone gaskets or many other gaskets. I think it's the most compatible of any gasket grease I've ever used. It's odorless, tasteless, and it's NSF, so it's totally food safe. So I just use a little bit, take my cylinder, put a little bit on there, on the O-ring, and I might even put a little on the inside of here. Just makes it easier to go in. Take a little bit more, put it on the inner portion, and that's where the smaller O-ring is. And this can go any direction, it really doesn't matter. Pop it down. Now, this is something I want to make sure that everybody understands. If I put this in here and I stop right there, meaning if I stop flush, I actually haven't assembled it correctly, so I want to take and push it all the way down. And it's actually a fair amount down. You want to go, I'd estimate about 1/4 inch, and it does stop. It goes down about 1/4 inch. So once you get down to that lower, you know you're actually at the right length. I've had a couple customers that didn't flush and had some weird issues, so we don't want to do that. So got that in there, so let's go ahead and do this one. And all I'm doing is pushing it down, very easy, till it stops. Now my inner cylinder gasket's been replaced. Now on my piston, I'm gonna show you something. So remember I was talking about the silicone. This is a silicone one. These are really easy to take on and off. So I can actually almost do them with my fingers. They're very soft. They're much more elastic. If I'm doing the rubber ones, they take a little more effort to pop off. The old ones are gonna just crumble, more than likely, unless you've used silicone in the past. They'll come off quite easy. But the black ones, or even the green ones, they'll actually come off and they'll probably break off, so don't worry about it. But I want you to pay attention. There's some important things to pay attention here. I usually tell people to take a photograph or do a drawing. These are V gaskets, and they're going different directions for a reason. What they're actually doing is holding the water back. They're actually compressing the water. This is actually pushing the water through your coffee. So these have to be put in an order. So on a pull machine, the bottom is down, the middle is up, and the top is down. So there's an actual order of that. So just be aware of that. And I again use the method, which is real easy. And I just use that method right there to take off the gasket, to put a new one on. I just reverse it. But here's the thing, with the rubber ones, not as elastic. I probably have to hold one side, and then I'll use my screwdriver and kind of do this, but I'm trying not to stab myself. And then I want to pop it on there good. And I can do the same thing. I can just go around in a circle to start from here and get it up here, no problem. To go ahead and remove this one, which I'm going to, because I'm going to put the silicone one back on. I'm trying to be very careful with the gasket. And the reason I'm being careful is I don't want to nick. If I nick even just a little edge of this, now this gasket won't seal. The whole point of replacing these is to keep this thing from, keep it sealing. So be very careful with your screwdriver. If you're going to use a screwdriver, be very careful. You don't want to force anything, and you want to make sure not to nick the gasket. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of why we're doing it. Again, I like the silicone for removal and installation because I can just do it without tools, which is kind of nice. So we've been using them for a while, and they've worked out pretty decent. So here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and put this back together. Obviously, you want the handle, going that direction. Different machines are different a little bit. Now before I put that in there, I might put a little more lube in there and lube up my gasket. Oh, one thing I want to talk about before I put this back together, almost forgot. This is an actual Teflon guide ring. Do you have to replace it? Probably not, unless it's been abused. Most of the time I don't replace it. If I have it with me, I'm already inside the machine, no big deal, they're not that expensive. What this does is it stops the actual brass portion of this piston from scoring the inside of your cylinder. If you fail or neglect these gaskets and you don't replace these gaskets as often as you should, then eventually these gaskets will break down and you'll have metal grinding on the inside of that. So you could actually wear out the inside cylinder, although it would take a lot of abuse to do that. They put this on here for a reason. The reason why they started putting guides on pistons was to prevent that. So even if the gaskets fail and you're leaking everywhere, but it's going metal on metal, you're not quite there, because this is the part that's actually saving it. And another thing is they're cut or split. They're split for a reason. The Teflon is not flexible really at all. So the only way to get this on would be to split it. So the only way I can get this back on here is to kind of pull it apart and put it back on. So it doesn't actually hold water back, it just prevents the piston from scoring. So when I'm putting it back in, I want to be careful, make sure everything's I kind of rock it a little bit. Some machines are really tight. You got to really, sometimes I've even had to like take a screwdriver and kind of push the V gaskets or the chevron gaskets. I had to kind of push them before they go in the cylinder. On our pull machines, not really an issue, but I usually, as a general rule, just kind of rock it and then go down. The next thing is really important. These screws, a lot of people have over tightened them over years. You might encounter a machine that's over tightened, and if you go to remove them, you might break one off. You can probably live with 1 or 2 screws broken off, and you'd probably still be able to use your head, no problem. You break 3 off, you're probably in trouble. It doesn't take an incredible amount of holding power on these screws to hold the upper portion to the lower portion. But I just always say put a little grease on the threads before I replace a screw or put it back together. Just kind of an anti-seize. And you don't have to tighten these really that tight. You just need them snug. And so don't over tighten it. That's super important. In fact, once this is cooled down and I remove screws, a little easier sometimes to remove the screw once it's cool. But when I put it back on, if I put a little bit tight and then it heats up, it's going to expand. And what's going to happen is it's going to get a little tighter inside the hole. The other thing is that these screws are stainless steel, so they're quite hard. This is brass, chrome-plated brass. This is quite soft. So if you get a little bit of water corrosion, like let's say the gaskets were starting to leak on you, you'll see some leaking right here, little drips. That's usually an indication that you need to replace your gaskets. Although I tell people don't wait till it starts leaking, replace it before that. What happens is that little bit of water will get down into the threads and kind of corrode it. So just try to avoid that. So I'm gonna go ahead, put one of the screws back, and how I do to find the hole is I kind of go back and forth. I can kind of find it. Okay, reasonably there. And then I'm gonna go ahead and use this is where I use my speedball. This is kind of cool because I can see how I'm at kind of an angle. I'm not even like totally straight and I can still get it going. And so what I do is I bring it with my speedball. Don't use your speedball for any torque because it's not meant for that. It's meant for loose screws and making it fast. And then I'll do my one across it. I'll do the one over here. I'll do the one over here. Kind of like a tire where you just crisscross the pattern because you want to evenly bring it down. And then once I get it loose in there, then I'll gonna go, okay, that's about right. I'm not gonna kill it. I don't over tighten it. Next thing I'm gonna do is replace the gripper gasket. So gripper gaskets can be pretty tricky, and I'm gonna show you a little trick. I've got a kind of a ninja trick, I call it. So basically what I'm doing is, now I'll show you actually. This is a silicone. Again, very soft and easy to put in stuff. I'm liking the silicone gaskets, but there's nothing wrong with the traditional. So you wrap the group A gasket over the screen. So what happens is it fits over the screen. A lot of people say that the screens are like they're used to a machine that's electronic and they take the screens out all the time. You don't have to do it with a piston machine. The reason why you don't replace the screens and you don't have to also remove them every day to clean them is that piston machines are positive displacements, meaning water's only going forward. We don't have on electronic machines, water goes back up and coffee goes with it, along with all kinds of other garbage. And so the screens get dirty. In this case, we don't have to worry about that. So the screens, you'll be very surprised. They may have a little residue, but not much. So I typically don't replace them unless they're pretty bad. And again, it's like the general rule, if you're already into it, maybe you should replace them. They're not that much money, but it's a general rule, I don't. So I slide the grip gasket over the screen, and I'm just sliding it over it, seat it all the way down. Make sure that you're aware of the fact that the gasket actually has a little on the edge, a little tiny chamfer or a little angle cut off of it. And what that's for is to make it easier to go back in the grip head. The other side is flat. There's no edge taken off. You know, it's like a bevel. So I try to remember to put that on there and try to tell people that something they put them upside down. You can still get it in there, probably still work just fine. But if you're aware of it, make sure that the chamfer is going up. So once I've done that, let's go ahead and put the silicone one in. Just a little easier, a little softer. So, and I go ahead and just for the video, I'll show you guys. I kind of push on it. Now I'm using a screwdriver. If I was doing this out in the field, I'd probably have a short screwdriver and I'd be just seating the grip gasket, and I go around in a circular pattern to get it started. And once I got it put there, and I obviously don't want to hurt the gasket or stab it really hard. So once I've got it in there, and let's go ahead and do it on this one. Sometimes I'll even put a little lube on there, it makes it sometimes easier. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, go around in a circular pattern. Silicone ones are they're easier to work with, but again, traditional would be the black. Now, I'm gonna show you the trick. This is the trick. So if I were to put the handle in right now, I have a hard time getting it in, especially with the black rubbers, and I'm trying to get it in because the gasket's kind of down. I'm not able to lock it and then push it over. So what I do is I remove this screen. That's the inner grip handle screen, and I'm gonna go ahead and put the handle in. And what I'm gonna do is kind of push up, and now you'll notice that the handle's way far over here. The reason why it is because I don't have that thicker surface. So I can get the handle really far over. It gives me more grace, and I kind of go back and forth. Then I'll put the screen back and then torque it over. At this time, I turn the machine back on, turn the water back on, let it warm up, run some water through the head. I usually run a bunch of water through the head to get rid of maybe some of the residual grease. Again, it's odorless, tasteless, won't hurt you, but it's just a good idea. And then what I'll do is I'll allow that handle to warm up and stay in that head, and it'll kind of push down on this gasket and kind of seat and make a good seal. And that's pretty much it, you guys. On some of the lever heads, you do have to, you probably should put a little grease on the actual cams. Some of the lighter duty ones, same stuff. The Super Lube works great. It's more of a clear, translucent grease too, which it isn't as unsightly as some of the other like darker greases. So that's not a bad idea. On some of the machines, they have little rubber bumpers and different stuff you have to replace. But ours is pretty simple. So that's pretty much it, you guys. And just go ahead and let it warm back up. Let it come up to full pressure. Pull the handle down a couple times. Run some water through it. Maybe make a couple espressos and let them go down the drain and reseason everything, and that's it. And I want to thank you guys for coming out, and I want to thank you guys for checking me out, and we'll talk to you soon.